Welcome to the Pressure Test. I'm Kamina Fullwood from the Coherence Lab, and I'm here with my co-host Paul Lyons from Mental Toughness Partners.
That's it.
And today we are debating about we automated the work, so why are people more exhausted? So we were promised that automation would free us up, less admin, less repetition, more time for the work that actually matters. And instead, people are more exhausted than ever, which tells us something important. The exhaustion was never about the work volume. It was about what the work was doing for people that had nothing to do with work. So, Paul, what's your take on why people are more exhausted?
Yeah, maybe it's a different take. I don't know, but I think automation definitely saves time on tasks. But the problem is that we just then, instead of using that time for recovery, we just use that time for doing more tasks. So we're actually doing more in the same time because the automation saved time, but we're not then going and putting our feet up or going for a walk or doing what we do. We're just using that 10 minutes or 20 minutes to do more stuff. So I think that efficiency sort of creates compression of work rather than recovery. So to my mind, that's the issue. And I think also automation means that we kind of take on more difficult tasks. So not only are we busier, but stuff's more complex. So it's more thinking around the complex tasks that automation's helping us with. So I think it's a double whammy. And
yeah, they're really good points. And, but I think, you know what? This isn't even new. Because if we look back in 1930, there was this guy Keynes, and he wrote an essay predicting that by 2030, which is ba-boom, only 4 years away. I was going to say 6. It's only 4 years away from now. And he predicted that people would only need to work 15 hours a week because productivity gains would be so enormous that nobody would need to work harder than that. And he's right. He's right about that productivity. The standard of living went up almost exactly as much as he predicted. And the people didn't rest anymore. They just found new things to fill time in with.
yeah.
So this has been a pattern for about a century.
Yeah.
So every time we automate something, the promise is more freedom and the result is more busyness. And that's actually not a coincidence. It's not even about technology. It suggests that busyness was never really about the workload in the first place.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And if you go back in time, 100 years, 200 years, 300 years, perhaps it's always been happening. So when we had the Industrial Revolution, we had a sort of similar uplift. And your researcher talked about the same 100 years ago. So the question is, where does it go from here? Because if AI becomes a regular thing within organizations and it's replacing a lot of the sort of mundane tasks that we do, we're going to have more time, but organizationally, we're going to spend that time on doing more stuff rather than recovery. So the question is, how do we change that? Is that a organization-wide or society-wide approach, a new approach we've got to take? Have we got to legislate on the number of hours that we can work? I just don't know.
Well, I want to give an uncomfortable truth, is that I want to talk about the leaders making these decisions on the workforce, right? Because, and I don't think it's that people are even acting maliciously for this to be true. It's the workforce is anxious, and it's not about, they're anxious about being replaced so they're trying to work harder so they're not replaced. And nobody has a plan for that. that's real structural incentive that's sitting underneath it. And you know, it's making people work harder because of this fear. And it's what's called automation anxiety. Now, I'm not saying that leaders are doing this on purpose. I'm saying that an organization doesn't really have a strong incentive to resolve this ambiguity
There's
that
no
actually
incentive
makes
at all.
people
That's
work
right.
harder to protect themselves. So I think it's actually worth sitting with that uncomfortable truth. Take it
Uh,
another step further.
Go ahead.
I don't think the machine is taking people's jobs. Think what it's doing is it's taking people's hiding place. So what I'm talking about is we automated all of those tasks, but we accidentally automated away the things that people were using to
Yeah.
hide, to avoid themselves. So suddenly they're freed up. There's a question, there's that big question that sits underneath. What do I actually do here? Because all of those tasks, they were their functions that kept them busy and occupied, and they felt useful and defined. And then they're left with this giant gap because something uncomfortable has surfaced. Who am I? They're asking deeper questions. What do I do? What's my purpose? How am I useful and valid here? And that's actually what's creating exhaustion as well.
Okay. I hadn't thought about it like that. I mean, sense of purpose is critical. And if you're unfortunately replaced by AI, then I can see why that appears, because you're trying to understand how you're no longer employable. So there's all sorts of self-assessment, self-identity challenges that you have. So I accept that. But the day-to-day reality is that you need to work to eat. So people are worried about employment for that reason.
So there's two things going on here. There's a very real threat, like it is a real threat. And there's also this other stuff that's also going on. So there can be two truths at the same time. And I
Yeah,
think this is
totally.
one of those things where there's two truths going on. And it's because all of this busyness was noise, and the automation turned off the noise, and those thoughts were always there. And now it's just these tasks just drowned them out. So therefore it's, their own inner life is actually come to the surface, and it feels really uncomfortable. So then it creates more confusion, and all of these emotions and threats come to the surface. And so they're faced with that. And so then it's like, well, I need to find a new way forward. I need to start getting creative because if everything that I was doing was automated, so I need to start getting creative to find new ways of being or being useful.
Mm.
So that if I've got all of this confusion and self-doubt coming to the surface, it actually slows down that creativity process.
Yes, yeah, does, yeah, yeah. Are you talking about people who've been replaced by AI or are working alongside AI?
Both, really. I mean, I guess it's more working alongside. It's like if you haven't yet been replaced or not going to, it's like, well, how do I make myself useful so I don't get replaced?
Yeah, I mean that's the pressure.
And
We're obviously talking about pressure, aren't we? In the pressure test, and
exactly.
and I would probably contend that people are worried about losing their jobs and losing their livelihood. Losing identity is really an important part of that. But at the end of the day, you've got to put food on the table. So I think obviously many people are getting very worried, and they should be. But in terms of what we talked about initially, organizations are compressing the work that needs to be done by using AI, and then filling that gap with
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 more
more
work.
work, more pressure. So the question is, how do people manage that pressure? How do people who are working alongside AI cope with having to do more in the same time? And
Well, that's what I'm saying is I think that they would be able to. I think part of the problem is, yes, they're getting more work, but why is it taking so long? Why is it filling in these gaps? Why are they feeling more consumed and more exhausted? Because they have less clarity, because they have all these fears coming up about I'm indispensable. What do I do from here? If all of that noise wasn't there, then they would have more clarity to be able to take on these new tasks that they're doing. So therefore, they're when we have more confusion, we do things in a quicker amount of time. I remember there was one person I was working with once, and she was running her business and she was working about, say, 9 or 10 hours a day and didn't want to work that long. So I worked with her. She had a lot more clarity, and the amount of time it was taking to do her tasks, the exact same amount of tasks, was about halved. She was working about 4 or 5 hours doing the exact same amount of work. And so that's what I'm talking about. If we were able to access these and resolve these issues around feeling valid and all these fears that have come up to the surface that were all shoved down by the busyness, if we were able to neutralize those, then we would actually not be so exhausted because this new amount of work wouldn't be
Yeah,
so consuming.
yeah, I hear you with that example, but to be fair, she had the choice. She made the decisions. She could make the decisions that we're going to fill 5 hours a day that she's not working with other things because she's the owner of the business. Most other people don't have that choice because they're working for an organization where they don't make those decisions.
No, I
And
think we've missed the point. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, yes, you're no longer doing these tasks, so you're doing these new ones instead. So here, and it's taking longer. People are more exhausted. But what if part of the reason it's taking so long and you're so exhausted is the emotional stuff, the fears? So if we take away the fears, then you don't feel so exhausted. You're just taking on new tasks and they don't take as long as they were. You can just get your work done like you were before and you go home.
well, yes, I see that. You can reframe that as a challenge, but you can only do that for so long because I think what we're talking about is that,
Boom, that's why you work on the nervous system. Hello.
well, that's why we're talking about burnout because if you work hard and overload your system for so long, then you're going to burn out. So, to my mind, that's the issue, not necessarily self belief or self identity. It's a
So what if it's
reframing.
those self-identities that's actually creating the burnout? If you didn't have all of that stuff, you wouldn't be burnt out. It's the emotional stuff that's creating tension in the nervous system, and the nervous system goes, I can't keep pushing, I can't keep pushing, I can't do this anymore, so it burns out. But if those fears weren't there, if that confusion and self-doubt was not there, then my nervous system wouldn't be overloaded. But the nervous system has all this stuff that's come to the surface. So we're talking about the change triggers at the biological system, the survival system. So the nervous system doesn't distinguish between my role and it being restructured. Because it feels like it's being hunted, right? So that's why you're going into survival, because if that's exhausting, I'm constantly under threat. That's why people are burning out. So this threat response is the same.
Well, it's the mental side of physically deciding that you're going to run a marathon at a marathon pace, or suddenly you've got to run the marathon at a 100-meter pace. You've got to run faster you've got to run faster in the same time. So all I'm saying is I think people are overstretched. Now and I'm interested to hear that is that it's the nervous system. issue, and we've just got to reprogram that in some way or reset that in some way, that people think in a different way or feel a different way. I can understand that to a degree, but I would call it a yes. You can change your mindset, but I don't think that's necessarily the answer. I think there gets to a point where you can't do any more physically, mentally. You just get burnt out, and I think many people are finding that they're just doing too much for too long. You 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 get parents who've got holding down a difficult job, and they've got a family at home. You've got both of them are working. That's a family that's under a lot of pressure. Now, I don't think it's a question of belief or self-identity. They kind of know who they are. They've just both got pressurized jobs, and for them, it's really difficult.
I think that, like I said, there's two things running here. There's a very real threat, and there's the survival threat that is false, which is all of this fear stuff coming up. So if we look at the fear stuff, and then there's stuff that you're saying is very real. People are having to push, push, push with no rest, and it's like when if we go back to when all that mindset stuff came in, and it was one of the things that came in was people looked at all of those SAS people, and they had these really amazing mind control methods in order to do these high survival things that they do, go out and rescue people under crazy circumstances. They had incredible mindsets. And all of those techniques were then brought into the workplace. But what's really interesting is those SAS people were only working on we'll call it a project. They were going in, doing something, and then they left. But we took all of those techniques, brought it to the organizations, the workplace, but it doesn't stop. It just keeps going on and on and on. So people are, like you said, being pushed and pushed and pushed without having a rest. And so, yes, the rest part is essential. And I think, that is a really critical thing that we need to look at in workplaces right now, because people cannot keep going and going and going without that rest.
Sure.
And as well as their nervous system is just becoming more and more fried. So we really need to look at the nervous system. What's going on? Why are their nervous systems being fried? Let's one, manage it. So it's like they're human beings. They're not robots. So we're treating humans as the same as the AI, and we're not.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I don't disagree with that. I do think reframing helps. I think mental toughness helps people deal with the pressure. They learn how to deal with the pressure and stay calmer and perhaps set boundaries. But there's so much pressure. I talk about a potential family with 2 or 3 young kids, and parents both in work. They're not thinking about belief or self-identity. They're thinking about how can we get through Christmas and have a break, because
Well, I get that, absolutely. But if you do the same thing over and over, you get the same result, right? It's like I understand that people feel like they're under enormous amounts of pressure, and they are. It's not just the workplace. It's, cost of living's gone up, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a ginormous amount of pressure. But if we don't at some point go, how do I just, do I really want to live in this fear state? Do I want to live like this? Is this sustainable? In 5 years' time, where am I going to be if I keep doing this? I think that's a very real question we need to ask ourselves. And I don't think it's going to be a good place. Or we can go, okay, well, I can do something about it. Look at my nervous system, so my nervous system doesn't keep getting overloaded and neutralize my survival state, so I'm not getting false triggered all over the shop. Then I can actually, speak up or create, awareness around. I can have a very more clarity around my job and what I can do, and I can articulate it better.
Yeah, I agree with you to an extent, but once you get to once you realise what am I doing here, just got to change these circumstances. Nothing changes. Then you make a decision. I'm going to move to a less pressurised role. Let's just say where you have more time, etc., etc., etc. Well, that I agree that many people make that decision, and and they should, because they're sort of hurtling towards
But what if we didn't have to do that? I think that's actually part of the problem of what's going on. These amazing people who are really good at their job are just going, that's enough. I and so we're losing really good people because, one, we're not looking at our nervous system. Two, we're pushing people too hard and not giving them a break.
I don't think it's a nervous system problem. The nervous system doesn't differentiate
But it's
between
the
different
theory
workplaces.
in our nervous system. How can it not be a nervous system problem?
I'm saying it's a more practical problem that people don't have the time. They're feeling burnt out, mentally fatigued as well as physically fatigued. So I think people choose just to go to a less pressurized environment because they've got space to breathe and think. And so for them, that's a practical problem. What they're thinking about is, I want less pressure. I've got to accept less pay. I think that's what people are thinking, rather than necessarily that it's a nervous system
And
problem.
I want to challenge that thinking because, yes,
Sure.
I get that on a surface level. That is surface level thinking. I want to go below that, and I really want to challenge people's thinking on that because, yes, that is true on the surface. It's very logical. But what if you could, like, all of those things that are creating that exhaustion apart from the physical work? Yes, I'm saying there is more work. I'm not disagreeing with that. But I'm saying, what if there was a way to manage it so you didn't get so exhausted and you could actually go and see the situation with more clarity? Because right now you can't see it clearly if you're exhausted. You're just going, I'm exhausted, I've got to get out of it. It's a survival response. That is the perfect example of what survival is. Doesn't feel good, get out. That's fight and flight right there. So therefore, that has to be a survival response. Therefore, that's the nervous system. So what if I could have more clarity because my survival responses weren't overriding me and going, get out, get out, get out. I could have more clarity and more focus. I could do what needs to be done with less exhaustion.
Well, it's a few things there. So I think it's an organizational challenge as well as an individual challenge. So I think we're underplaying the organizational challenge because, as you say, too many good people are going to opt out of this, and therefore organizations are going to have to restructure the way that they're doing things. But in terms of an individual basis, I agree with a lot of what you say, but I don't think it's necessarily. We differ on whether it's fixed by a change to your nervous system or mindset. Now, I think the brain reacts, the mind decides. That's my view. So there is some reframing to do from a mindset perspective. Is that resetting the nervous system as well? I don't know, but on a superficial level, perhaps for most people, they're not thinking about nervous system. They're probably
No,
thinking,
they're not because they're in survival. And so I want to tell people you're in survival. Have a look. Can you notice that you're in survival? Can you notice that you've got fear and anxiety? That is survival. So therefore, yes, I'm not saying the organizations don't need to take a long, hard look at themselves too. This is all change. This is all new. Change is takes a lot of energy. And then we'll, get to a point when the change stabilizes. We're definitely not there yet, but then it will be less exhausting. But right now, people are just so exhausted, more exhausted than they've ever been, like right down to their core. And so it's like, I can't keep doing this. And a holiday isn't fixing the problem. They come back still exhausted. So, yes, we need to look at it from both an organizational and an individual level. I'm absolutely agreeing with you that it's an organizational issue, but it's also an individual issue. Get more clarity so therefore you can not be controlled by circumstances so much. When circumstances are controlling you, then you need to stabilize your nervous system, neutralize it, get more clarity, and take
You
control of what's going on.
you can clear your mind just by working fewer hours, perhaps, or organizing your day in a different way. But to my mind, that is that you're working too hard. You can feel you're working too hard. So it's a reframing from a mindset perspective. You can think about thinking more clearly, going through a process, and you probably work out that what I'm doing is not good for me. And then you reset there. But to my mind, that's a mindset challenge as much as it is a nervous system challenge.
And then we also look at the body. People have been overriding their bodies. You're
I
pushing too
agree.
hard. You're pushing
Yeah.
too hard for so long
Yeah.
that they haven't been listening, and it's hit a point where their body has just gone, I can't do it. They weren't listening to it back here. They weren't listening to it here, and then it's hit this point. So now
Yeah.
people are
Massive impediment.
starting to have to learn listen to their body. Hey, oh,
Mm.
I need to stop here. I need to rest. And so I find that actually really useful, because if you've been ignoring what your body's been telling you for so long, and until it hit a point where you can't ignore it anymore, then it's time to go, all right, I
I,
can opt out of life, and I can actually start listening.
yeah, I totally agree with you. And there's not a person I know who doesn't suffer from working too hard and who looks for ways
Okay.
to try.
Okay.
There's only one person I know who doesn't suffer from working too hard. So you've got to look for ways where it's not black or white. Where I've got to stop doing what I'm doing. That people look for ways to modify their working day. How can I get through my working day in a more efficient way? And uh, regulating nervous system may be one, but there may be other ways to do that, which is a lot around boundaries, a lot around finding joy, breathing. There's a whole number of strategies that one can use, which I don't think go to working out how your nervous system is working for you or not. I, I'm obviously
It's new
curious
thinking.
about.
It's new thinking that people haven't thought about, which is part of why people have gotten to this point. They haven't really been listening. They haven't really gone deep down, because they've just been doing life,
Yeah,
and now life is doing them. And
that's a
so
good
now it's
phrase, isn't it?
time to start looking at things in a different way that you may not have even heard before. So because, like I said, it's a very real survival response they're having. This is too hard,
Yeah,
get out.
that's
Rather than going, what's really been going on? You've been pushing yourself too hard for a really long time, and now you just can't do it anymore. So, how do
yeah.
I start to manage my life in a more efficient way? How do I start to manage my health, my body, my everything in a more efficient way that's actually sustainable? So, in 5 years' time, I'm kicking ass.
I agree with all of that, including the kicking ass. I really agree with that.
It's new thinking, and it's the old thinking isn't working anymore. So
Wh-
it's time to start looking at things in a new
it-
way.
The old thinking works for some people. It's
Well,
everyone's different, so
well,
different things work for
is it
different
working
people.
for those people who are exhausted?
That's what we're saying is that's an organizational issue. If you've got to run a marathon, at a 100-meter pace because your organization dictates
But
that.
yes, it's the same thing, just in a larger scale. It's like, yes, on an individual level, we need to start looking at making our lives more sustainable. And the
I,
organization has to start looking at their employees as humans who need to be more sustainable.
yes.
So it's measuring their ability to handle pressure rather than performance. That's where we need to change the organizations. We need to stop measuring performance and start measuring coherence.
Well, we're always going to measure performance, but yes, we
But a lot less. because if the people just keep you pushing to perform, we're all going to burn out, right? Which is the problem we're seeing right now. But if we start measuring coherence, we're going to get the same output, but in a more sustainable way, because people will be clearer. They will be able to handle their work better, and it and they will be able to perform because they won't be doing their work from fear. They will be doing their work through passion, and that's a state where we're kicking ass, because I'm passionate about what I do, rather than I'm doing this because I've got to pay the bills and look after my family.
Yeah, you're going to get both, I think. But
Well,
paying
of
the bills,
course.
looking after your family is always going to be number one. So doing well and being well, both of those are vital. And I think we all want to get that balance. I think we all do. So you
And it does, and it is both coming from a top-down level and an individual level. The organisations really do need to start caring about the well-being of their employees.
and
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 the
they'll
more
only
they
do
start doing that, then the individuals will feel safer that they can start
yeah,
doing that.
and they'll only do that when there's a reality that you lose the best people if you don't provide that environment. So that's organizational, and organizations will get there because it's driven by
They are. They're already
health
starting to
benefit.
lose people.
But from an individual basis, you're looking for ways that you can feel safe, you can be well, and that's an individual choice. And I just
But
think what you're
we
saying.
need to put that to the organisations. We need to let them know this is what's important for me. And so one, they'll notice they're losing good people. But if the people start saying, this is really important to me, can you this is what I need to do. And the more and more people that say it, the more they start listening.
Well, organizations are not brilliant at listening to that stuff unless the people who are saying it have
But
moved on.
if we can prove that they will be as effective, even though they're having more rests, then they will start listening. And I have actually just written a manifesto which sits on my website that breaks down my thinking and my way of working, that it really scrutinizes, does it really work? And you can see that on my website, Coherence Lab, and I little plug in there.
Plug.
But I
I,
think that actually talks about what we're doing
I,
here,
I, I
what we're
don't
talking
doubt
about.
I don't doubt that, but organisations aren't going to change on a manifesto. So we either make society change and organisations change because they realise they're not attracting the best people
Well,
with.
I'm not saying one manifesto is going to change the world, but I'm saying if more and more people start talking like this, more and more people start saying this is what's important, and I can still do the work without being exhausted and still reach the levels, the
So,
KPIs or
so that's
the
societal change. That's a change in society.
a change in society. But I can, like, they are driven by the dollar. Like, we're not going to
Societies
pretend that
are,
it's not.
organisations are, definitely. Everyone wants more balance. There's just unfortunately, not unfortunately, because it has worked reasonably well until perhaps now. We're getting out of kilter. We're getting out of balance because people are having to work too hard for the salary that they get, and that's leading to ill health and burnout. And really, what we want to do is try and readdress that balance so that it is a fair balance. Now, I think that's societal change and organizational change. But as an individual, at the moment, you have to take the responsibility. And what you're quite rightly saying is people.
But what if we didn't put so much judgment onto people, like take responsibility? And what if we actually just recognize that what's happened is that the tasks have been removed and there's nothing to hide behind anymore? And so what if we actually just went, all your stuff has come to the surface. You can't hide behind it and shove it down anymore. You can give it a really good try, but look how exhausted you are trying to push it away. It's making you tired trying to hold all of
Yeah.
those inner thoughts away, that's what's also making you tired. You can't push it away. Imagine if you didn't have to push it away anymore, you wouldn't be so exhausted. So we've got to find a new fix that people that is sustainable, and it's about not pushing away your inner thoughts anymore. So what if it's, because what happened was what surfaced when all the busy work disappeared was these fears. I'm not producing. Am I safe? And it's not a skills gap that's going to resolve it. It's the base of the brain question that's running underneath all of this stuff. And you can't really fix all of that with a training program. So it's really by addressing these safety issues, because yes, we can say this is talking to individuals. We're talking to individuals here. What can I do to make my life more sustainable? What can I do to make my workplace more sustainable? What can I do to make my organization more sustainable?
Yeah.
And they all start from the same thing. Let's help people feel more safe, because if we recognize that all of their safety issues have come to the surface, no one's feeling safe. So let's all address it together.
They're great questions. And hopefully we can all find solutions personally and at an organizational level. But I think we'll just find them in a different way. There are different solutions to different people. But they're great questions. I think that kind of sums up where we're at.
Starting the conversation of recognizing that it's about our inner thoughts have come to the surface and we're not feeling safe. If we can just start that conversation and start getting that out there, then people will start addressing the real issue rather than trying to escape and run to a less productive job, less productive or less outputty job that isn't as fulfilling.
Well, there's a few generalities in there. But,
I guess. Okay. Yes, it might be more fulfilling in some circumstances, but or maybe they might find something that's extraordinarily fulfilling. But it's really, yes, okay.
It's an individual choice, I think, is what we're saying.
It's an individual choice, but if we don't actually address the issue, you're not going to even know what's possible, because you're just running away to somewhere that feels safer. What if I didn't have to run away? What if we all could recognize, one, that we've all got safety issues running that is making us feel exhausted? So if we can just recognize that, then see what's possible.
I'm exhausted.
Are you?
Yeah.
Talking to me to do that kind
of a harrowing session. So have you got any questions for our audience?
how about you? Have you got any questions for our audience today?
I'd like to understand whether people think AI is a real threat to their role and their livelihood. And if it is, what choices do they have to make? And the choices probably are do they run as fast as they can run? Do they have to make changes to themselves? Do they have to make changes to their lifestyle? What gives if AI is having an impact on your life?
Great question. Love to hear the answers. I'm looking forward to it.
All right.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us for today's pressure test. We will see you next time.
Will do. Got to go for a line down.